If you have requests for what we study Sunday or Wednesday, let me know. I'll be happy to work on that and try to get those scheduled in. But we're going to continue with the men preaching or teaching on Sunday morning, and then I'll teach on Wednesday night, Lord willing. Okay, Esther chapter 6. You remember Esther chapter 6 is the story of the king and God's providence. You remember causing him to read the book. You remember he was sleepy. And he happened to open to the book at the very spot where they read about how Mordecai had saved his life. Remember that? And we talked about God controls things in ways that we don't understand, whether it's our sleep, it's the books that we read, the people that we encounter. And you remember what Esther did there. The question was, hey, what would you do for a man that had saved the king like this? He asked Haman. And Haman said, well, I would, he should be, shown great honor. You read there in verse 7, Haman told him, this man whom the king delights, this is chapter 6, verse 7, the man whom the king delights in, let royal robes be brought, and let be riding on a horse, a royal crown. And of course, who is that man who should be shown that honor? Mordecai. And so Haman has the ultimate shame of having to lead Mordecai in procession. In verse 12, you see that Haman hurried home and bemoans the fact that he's had to do this with Mordecai. And you remember that his own family recognizes that God's at work in this. They say in verse 13, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you shall not overcome him, but will fall surely before him. They recognize that things aren't going well for Haman. And then the verse we didn't read 2 weeks ago was verse 14 of chapter 6. It says that while they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. Remember, Esther had providentially asked for 2 meals. The first meal is one in which she kind of says, come back to the meal. She, frankly, during that meal, the king gets probably inebriated and he can't go to sleep. And that's when he discovers what has happened, that he was saved by Mordecai. So God has worked through that first feast, and so now there's this second feast. And this is where we read about Esther's courage. Courage. I want to just kind of focus on that word. Should we be courageous as Christians, right? What does courage mean to you? If you say, Quincy, you're courageous. Ishmael, you're courageous. What does that mean? If you're courageous, what does that look like? What do you think of when you hear that word? Because Esther is going to show us courage. Let's just reflect for a moment. What does that word mean in our life? Dottie, if you're courageous, what does that mean? What's that? You're sure. You're sure of things. You're willing to step into places that other people wouldn't, right? Courage. Does courage mean the absence of fear? No, it's not. So it's not that you don't fear, right? It's what? If you still fear things, but you're what? What would you say? In spite of your fear, you're willing to take risks. You're willing to step into a situation, right? So, if something happens and it scares you, if you're still willing to address that, you're courageous, right? If you're scared of the dark, Dominic, you scared of the dark? Sometimes, yeah, me too. But you're scared of the dark, and like every night I get up early and I go and walk into our living room, and I know my little dog is laying somewhere on the floor, but I don't have my light, right? And so you shuffle your feet forward, In my great courage, I shuffle my feet into the living room, willing to trip up my dog. I know there's danger there. There's a small amount of courage, and half the time I do end up stepping on them, but still, I soldier forth in my nightly courage. Yeah?
I give a funny example of courage
yeah.
that I've experienced. This is back when I lived in upstate New York. One thing people may not know about is that I'm terrified of wasps.
Of wasps?
Wasps.
Okay.
One time I had one in my house.
Yeah.
And, for a while I was kind of afraid to do anything about it. Eventually I kind of just, I grabbed a textbook that I had in my house, kind of used it to kill them behind
Yeah.
Went behind the blinds.
And you were able to do it. You were able to take, yeah. You survived it.
I did.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. You courageous soul with your wasps. I'm impressed. You're more courageous. I would leave them there. Yes. What is courage? What's that?
I was thinking just looking at him. Yeah.
Don't give him a hard time. He was courageous. He was courageous. So courageous is willing to do something despite your fear, right? You're willing to step into it. And really courage is a key virtue. And we see Esther. Esther has no power. I mean, she's the queen, but the king has the ability to kill her. We've seen already that the king was willing to do Vashti. So you think about something in your life which is frightening for you to do, but you know you should. And that's what we need to be thinking of, especially if it's something for the Lord, right? One thing that I've been thinking about is how in the mornings I can send a card to someone who's not a Christian, and invite them to services, invite them to study the gospel with me. And you know the thing about it is, if you don't prepare the card the night before or the day before, you're going to be so tired you won't do it the next day, right? And so being willing to prepare some sort of communique or a text to somebody the night before, that takes courage. Evangelism, even being willing to talk to people in our own family about God, is a courageous thing. So let's observe here how Esther, how she reveals. She's going to reveal something in these verses that is unknown to the king, and then she's going to reveal something that is unknown to Haman. Okay, and so there's a big discovery that happens here. Notice how Esther shows courage. Let's read chapter 7, verses 1 down to 6. And my question is how do you see Esther's courage and really her cunning? She's really wise in this. So let's read 7, verse 1. You with me? So the king and Haman went into the feast with Queen Esther. See him there? And on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, "What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." He said that to her before, you remember. Verse 3, Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor in your sight, O God, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent. For our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king." Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he who has dared to do this?" And Esther said, "A foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. Okay, this is risky stuff that Esther has revealed. First of all, has she revealed to the king before that she's a Jew? This is a revelation. Haman doesn't know that she's a Jew. This is news to him, that the very people who he has conspired to kill includes the queen. And so she comes and she confronts him with great courage there in verses 1 and 2. You can imagine going to the king and speaking truth to power. And that requires us to be willing to put ourselves at risk. And she does. But notice how she's cunning. When she says she asks for her life and the life of her people, she makes this comparison. She says, in verse 4, if we had been sold, that would be okay, because, our being as slaves is nothing compared to, you being, having to lose some people over this situation. So basically, she's appealing to the king's own pride, saying, this is not, you're more important, king. What you want is more important. But please, look at my people and consider them. She's really smart. She didn't just come out and say, save us. She says, if it was a small thing, I wouldn't even be asking it, because I know I don't want to trouble you, basically, she says. But she's playing to his pride to a certain degree in asking the question. So in other words, should we be wise and discerning in our courage? Absolutely. You got to think, okay, I'm going to be courageous, but how can I make this work out for the best? How can I make this work out for the best? So, for example, let's say, and this is a situation at our school, we have a daily chapel. We have a daily chapel, and all of the students come together to sing during chapel, right? And we have one of the girls at the chapel who is singing off key, but she sings very loudly. Okay, some of us can relate to this, but the problem is the microphone is picking up her voice. So when we live stream the chapel, right? And so people on the live stream are saying, "Man, what is that noise?" And it's the young girl who's singing off key because she's next to a microphone. Okay, and what do you do in that situation? What would you do? You're having to face that situation. You're not wanting to offend the girl, right? Because she's showing real spirituality in that. And so, a coward would just ignore it. Say, "Oh, let's just not do anything. Just not do anything." But someone said, "Hey, we have a problem. We have a problem. This is an issue." Okay, so we didn't hide. There was courage in it. And so we got together and we said, "Okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this?" So it took courage to just kind of, because there was disagreement. Some people say, "Oh, don't say anything, don't do anything." We're like, "Oh, it's just going to go on forever," and people are discouraged by hearing that. I mean, it's you don't want to make too much of it, because does God care what we sound like? No, but we kind of care what we sound like, especially if the person who's off key, I'm not looking at anybody, is singing out loudly and everybody's being affected by it, because it does affect. So what do? And so you get together, you're courageously addressing the issue, and you're thinking about it, and someone says, "Well, we should just go tell her." You could go tell her, "Please be quiet." What do you think that would do to her? Oh, Linda's shaking her head. I mean, that poor girl, she probably would be devastated, Who knows how she react. So someone said, "Well, let's think about this problem. How's her voice being picked up?" And we said, "Well, there are these microphones. We figured it out. There's these microphones that hang from the ceiling that pick up the voices in the audience. And she just happens to sit right under one of them, right? And so it's figured. And said, "Well, what if we just turn down that microphone?" We say, "Oh, let's see if that works." And so we did it, and guess what? Problem solved. Okay. So it's kind of like Esther. Esther's addressing the problem. She's not ignoring it. But she's saying, "Okay, how can I work this to where I can get this accomplished?" She doesn't just come out and say. What she could have said was the truth. Who was the one who approved the Jews being killed in the first place? Huh? The king. She could have just said, "King, you are killing me." Does she say that? She doesn't accuse him. She doesn't take him on directly, does she? That would have been probably unwise. He would have been like, "Who are you to, defy the king?" This sort of thing. She works around it and she praises him. She says, "You're much more important than me. And if it was just a matter of slavery, I wouldn't say anything. This is a matter of death." And he gets sympathetic toward her. So he asks, "Who is this?" Okay? And so then the next question is, what is she going to do? Is she going to say, "It was you, king, that did it"? No. She points to Haman. She says it was him. You remember what he says, this foe and enemy, she says in verse 6. And Haman, his reaction is, he realizes, uh-oh, not only have I done this to the Jews, I didn't realize it, but I'm doing this to the queen too. And he is appropriately terrified. He is scared. I'd be scared too, because he realized I got the queen after me, right? And so you see here that she has counted the cost of saying these things. She's willing to put herself out there, but she's not being foolish about it. So, I think it's just a good point that when we're courageous, it doesn't mean that we have to go in like a bull in a china shop. You know what that means, Micah? A bull in a china shop? What's a china shop? Full of what? Yeah, a bunch of glass and such that can easily break. And if you go in there like a bull, you're just breaking everything, and you're just not paying attention, to what you're doing. She's paying attention, and she's being careful. So, Christian, if there's something you have to do that's courageous, right? You just think, okay, what's the wise way to do this? I'm going to do it, But if you think about it, you figure out, well, I can just turn the microphone off, and problem solved. So think about these things. How do you do it? So God causes us to be courageous, but also cunning in the way, wise in the way that we think about those things. Any examples of that where you can think of you had to be courageous, but you did it in a way that kind of gets the good effect, right? Yeah. Yeah, you figured out how to avoid those wasps and get them out of there, right? Kind of, yeah. Husbands and wives are really good at this. The idea is you've got to talk, you've got to communicate. But there are ways in which you communicate that really are trying to make for peace and not confrontation, right? I say we're really good at this. Oftentimes we're not good at this, but we try to. Yeah.
Well, I have an issue now, so if anybody has any advice, please let me know.
Yeah.
I have pretty much a bullfrog in my garage.
Yes.
I'm trying to be courageous in front of my kids, so I have a van. I'm just afraid of it as they are. So, anybody got any?
Yeah. Hey, Esther over here is asking for wisdom. What'd you say? He's afraid of the bullfrog in his garage, and so what do? You want to get it out of there. You don't want to be the wimp who the kids are like, oh, Dad's so scared of a toad. There you go.
And go over there and wherever he is and. I don't want to see it. I don't know that one. Yeah, that's okay.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I think oftentimes the key to this is, and so yeah, there's the bullfrogs, there's the wasps. We got to figure those things out and figure out how to work on that. Yeah.
You mentioned wife, husband, and wife.
Yeah.
Definitely, the scripture tells you, husbands will not be harsh with your wives.
There you go.
Be wise and gentle with them,
Yeah.
because your prayers will be hindered.
Yeah, absolutely. And to recognize, Paul even talks about how the woman is the weaker vessel, and I don't think he's meaning they're physically weaker. I think he's meaning that women oftentimes have emotions that men don't appreciate. And, as a husband, you might just say, you know what, I apologize, and get over it. Is that the appropriate response? No. It is there's a sympathy.
I was tried that before, it didn't work.
Yeah. Go ahead. What's that? The tone is exactly right. See, I planned that. Yeah. So yeah, that's exactly right. There's a tone, and so how you say things. Usually, if you're hurting and someone has hurt you, rather than making an accusation against them, you have hurt me and you've wronged me, what you oftentimes could do is you describe your feeling. When you've done that, it makes me feel sad or it makes me feel insecure. And you help them see the situation from your perspective. That's often a wise way to handle it, because most people are pretty sympathetic. But if you accuse them, they're going to bow up and be defensive. So it is a matter of tone and the words you use. Good. Tone is very important. Yeah.
Timing is very important.
Yes, that's right.
Esther saw that.
Yes.
She saw that timing was
That's
very
exactly
important.
right. That's exactly right. And for better or worse, the book of Esther, you may have picked up, often talks about how the king is drinking, right? You probably picked up on that. And the fact of the matter is Esther uses that to her advantage, right? And so to figure out what those moments are where, someone is most prone to being receptive to what you have to say. My moment for that is when my wife has been able to relax, take a shower, she's down for the night. If I need to talk to her, I look for that moment. She's relaxed, she's chilled out, and then I drop the bomb on her. And that tends to, it softens a bit, or she knows. I'll just give you insight to me. I'm at my highest stress moment in the morning when I'm leaving the house. I'm having to get everything together. I'm usually late. I'm having to think about where I'm going. I oftentimes have a difficult conversation. And she knows, we have learned over 26, 7 years of marriage, do not drop anything on me in those 5 minutes before I'm about to leave the house, because it never ends well. It's just, we've learned, and we know, like this morning, there was something, and we saw where it was headed. We saw where it was headed. We just said, okay, let's just back each to our own corners. We'll talk about this later, we're joking about it, but that really is what's going on here, is being courageous to address the situation, but doing it wisely. And Christians have wisdom about these things, just to know there's a time for these things. Yeah.
Also, like Lindsay said, the tone.
Tone.
It's also the expression.
That's right.
Body language.
That's right. Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. What I have found is that if you even if you're not happy, if you smile, usually you get a better response, right? And I'll give you a sense. This is not a smile, right? You know how people respond to, it's these muscles right here. So if I'm going to give a smile, you got to get these muscles moving, and then it's different as opposed to, right? That different. And you just learn those things, you know. So I won't charge any extra for that little. You know, but Esther, you really got to see that God is showing us her wisdom there. Okay, so Ahasuerus has this realization, that what has happened, and he's confused in verse 5. He says, "Who is he? Where is he? Who has dared to do this?" I mean, first of all, as we already pointed out, Ahasuerus was the one, right? But it really does seem, if we were to read the text kind of on its face value, that he's confused. He doesn't know, he doesn't remember, he's not putting two and two together, or he's just willfully ignorant, right? And Esther doesn't take advantage of that in a negative way. But notice here, Ahasuerus he never can figure out things on his own. You figure that out? He's always having to ask for advice. He's always having to get insight, right? And I think that's, as Christians, one thing we realize is that oftentimes people are kind of clueless, and they need insight. They need wisdom. They need us to give guidance. And you may think, well, who am I to give guidance? Well, oftentimes you're in a better position than the person you're talking to give guidance. You know more, and you've just got to lean into it, even though you don't know everything. And so she gives this insight, but he is really he really doesn't seem to understand that he was the one who had betrayed them. And so you see that in verse 7. Let's read verses 7 down through 10. And notice here his confusion and then Haman's ruin that shows through here. And so notice what is the king's response and what is Haman's response in this scene here, okay? So notice here, beginning in verse 7, and the king arose in his wrath. We've seen him angry before, right? And went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. And the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine, as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. Apparently like falling at her feet, begging for mercy. Well, the king sees her just as he's falling on the couch towards Esther. And how does he interpret it? The king said, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house?" And as the word left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face, in other words, to bring him out. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, "Moreover, the gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose words saved the king, is standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high." And the king said, "Hang him on that." And they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king was abated. And so, first of all, did Haman see what was coming? He was completely surprised. He had no idea that this was going to happen. And so you can see how God worked in surprising ways on this. And what do you make of the justice? Isn't this? We would say there's this word karma. What does karma mean? It's not a Christian idea per se, but what's that?
Is it Hindu?
Yeah, it's a Hindu. Karma idea is that you're gonna get what you deserve, right? What's that?
My mom used to say, what goes around comes around.
What goes around comes around. And there is a principle there, is that you reap what you sow. That's a biblical principle. You reap what you sow. And so Haman was willing to kill Mordecai on the gallows, and what happens? He ends up being this justice. And so you think about that. I think, what's Jesus' principle, the golden rule? Do unto others as you want them to do to you. And it's kind of you should treat others believing there's a kind of karma. That's not what Jesus said, but the idea is that you might reap what you sow, so you do to others as you would want them to do to you. That is a golden rule. It really is. And so Haman had not done that. And in fact, it ends up coming back on him. And you see, by the way, God's providence. When did the king walk in? Right at that moment where it appeared that Mordecai was trying to assault the queen, right? And that's not by accident. God moves things because the question is, what caused Mordecai to die or to be hanged? Was it
Haman?
I'm sorry. What caused Haman to die? Was it the fact that he had tried to kill the Jews, or was it the fact that he had tried to assault the queen? Well, most immediately, it's the fact that he tried to assault the queen. Where did that come from? Well, that was a complete surprise, And so, you know, I mean, there's a lesson there for us, yeah.
Because you wonder sometimes, because, you know, what you see, it's not what it appears. Sometimes we
Yeah.
judge
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
seeing something
Yeah.
that's really not there.
Absolutely.
We judge people.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And there's different lessons in this, right? God works things together. Go ahead.
Yeah, not finding that God mentioned in the book, but Mordecai tells Esther, you know, if you don't do this, then it won't be delivered.
Yes.
It's not by your hands. But
Yep.
you think of the providence of God. If you go back, did Vashti play a part in the providence of God to save the Jews?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Her scruples,
Yes,
she said no.
yes,
And you think about how God's providence works.
right. Absolutely. Set in motion things. It's dominoes that fell that led to this. Right. So Vashti, in her own principal stand against the king, is in part responsible for the things that follow. And so good actions beget good results oftentimes. That's exactly right. Good.
I just want to say, absolutely right. What
Yes.
Our brother said about the power of God, how He works things out. So the negative force works things out also that way.
That's
We're
right.
not aware of that.
Yes.
Because we're consumed by sin.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're not looking up to Christ.
There's so many principles that evil things corrupt things. You know, little leaven leavens the whole lump. Evil communications corrupt good morals, right? The Satan is out there trying to devour us. So yes, evil things perpetuate those sorts of things. And then, you know, Haman, you know, his forwardness in trying to get what he wants. He is someone who goes after he wants whatever the cost. He had a habit like that. We get these habits, right? And we get used to doing something which is not right, and we end up paying the cost, right? So here's Haman. He's been trying to get his way to kill the Jews and kill Mordecai and all this. And this one time, he dares to throw himself down at the queen, which itself was a pretty amazing act, right? A bad act. And that's the one that catches him. He got in this habit, yeah.
Well, and I get the impression that he's more begging her.
He is begging her, yeah.
He's not assaulting her.
No.
He's begging her.
He is.
Please, what are you
Right,
doing? You
right.
know, this is
Right, yeah,
going to be my downfall.
right,
And
right,
he had so much, he exalted himself so high.
Right.
And now she was bringing it down. He's like, please don't do this.
right, exactly. But it
then
cost
the
him
king comes in right
at the wrong
at
time.
absolute worst time possible.
Yeah.
And he's been drinking. So
Yeah.
when you drink, you start.
Well, that's the other thing, is that's exactly right. He's not taking care of his attention, his
not
behavior.
sober, right?
He's not sober. He's not sober. Have you all ever heard of the Billy Graham, I think it was the Billy Graham rule. Have you heard of this rule? Billy Graham had this rule that he would never be in the presence of a woman alone that wasn't his wife. And people, you know, non-Christians especially kind of thought, oh, that's ridiculous. That's you know, and it is pretty strict. You think about that, you know, never, you know, all the business meetings he had, that sort of thing. But he was just very conscious of the fact that just even the appearance of impropriety or the temptation that might come from that opportunity, he just says, I'm not going to allow myself to be in that situation. I know a lot of men who have a similar thing, you know. I'll just tell you, you know, in my office, some of you have been there, we instituted something a few years ago when I came in to where every door at the college in an office has glass in it, to where there's no private office. You can always see into them, you know. And we did that kind of with the Billy Graham rule principle, that if you're in an office alone, and I have women who work for me, and I'm in there with them, we're not in there in private. My secretary can see in the door. And my point here, and this relates to Haman, is that you're trying to avoid behaviors which could lead to sin. And Haman had let himself go for so long, just doing evil thing after evil, that it finally catches up to him. He wasn't doing this in order to assault the queen, but he had fallen into evil habits, which led, in this case, for it to cost him. And so there's this question in our life of, you know, what can we learn from this passage? And one thing that we can learn is what are evil, or at least unwise habits that we've fallen into, that it may not catch us that time, but down the road, kind of like Lim was saying, things can, or and it can catch you. Yeah,
Well, it's the reputation.
that's right.
He had a reputation
That's right.
of being evil and doing
That's right.
things sneaky, whatever.
That's right.
And the one time he wasn't.
Yep. Yeah, that's
nobody
right.
believed him.
No one. That's
So
exactly the little boy who cried
it was
wolf.
like
Yeah.
this.
Sorry about that. I don't know,
My,
where's that coming from?
My stepdad used to say,
Yeah.
your reputation is the one thing that you alone are responsible for. So if you have a good reputation and somebody asks you something and you answer them, they're gonna know that's true.
That's
And
right.
I try to instill that in my kids. And,
Yeah.
always be honest. If
Yes.
somebody asks you a question, be honest, and then that way they'll know
That's right.
when another time comes, whether
Yep.
you're telling the truth or not.
That's right. That's right. Good principle. Yes, Mel.
It's true. I've been a jokester in my life, so joking, and I take things serious, and then I see the reaction.
Yes, that's a great example. Yeah.
Causing others to stumble.
And you've probably had the experience of saying, okay, I got to sober up a bit in terms of my communication. That's exactly what we're talking about. So flip it and just kind of think about Esther and think about our lives. We're not facing an Ahasuerus. We're not facing a king like this. But what can we learn? When it comes to our courage, should we risk much for the gospel? Should we be willing to take risks? Even if it's a conversation with our friend or with our family member, maybe even it's just us taking a stand that I'm not going to behave in certain ways, or I'm going to speak the truth about a certain situation. That there's a need for risk in that. And then when we see evil in someone's life, sin, should we confront it? Should we call it out and name it and say in wise ways? But should we say, you know what? This is like she said, they're trying to kill my family. She called it out, and she called Haman out. Should we be willing to say things like that? Yeah, I'll just say, I hope that, we love each other, but I hope that if ever you hear me say something, or if I hear you say something, you're like, well, that just doesn't seem right. You would take a risk and come into me and saying, John, I don't think that's right. I don't think that's biblical. And I would imagine that you'd be kind of nervous doing that, right? But do you think that I would want you to do that? I hope you know I would.
Okay.
You got Ismail says, let's talk after class. Yeah.
And with that, you need to both be willing to sit down and study and find what the
That's
truth
right.
is.
That's right.
If I come to you and say, John, I didn't agree with that.
Yeah.
I would hope that you would say, well, let's sit down and study
That's
this.
right.
And then we can find whether I was in the wrong or you were in the wrong.
Yeah.
And come
And study to it,
come
yeah.
back to what God said.
And oftentimes, if you see you both are serious about knowing the right, it affects your relationship because you're like, okay, maybe we can disagree on this, but we know we're both pursuing what's right. Yeah, John.
I think it's easier if you have a close fellowship.
Yes.
If you have a rapport.
Right.
Because if not, it's harder to do that because now it comes off maybe a little bit as judgmental.
Yes, that's right. That's
we don't
right.
have that rapport.
Exactly.
Like you say, if we know we love each other,
Yeah.
then it's easier. But if you don't have that rapport, sometimes someone will take it as, oh, you're being judgmental.
That's right.
You don't know me like that, and they can put up those defenses.
Yeah, absolutely.
Instead of seeing it first from God.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And even when you know you love each other, it can be difficult. I had one of my children recently who had a boyfriend or a girlfriend, I won't say which, at home, and we were sitting around the table, and it had been a long day, and I had a lot of work, and I got up from the table before everybody was done, and I went and sat down and started to work. And my child came to me afterward, and he said, he's my son, and he said, I want to talk to you. I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be good. And he shared with me that, he wondered, do you not like my girlfriend? Because you got up and, you left the table and didn't sit. And I said, oh, son, I see it now from your perspective. I promise you, it was just your old man being, unthinking and tired. But I was so glad that he came and told me that because he took a risk and had opened his heart to him because I could have said, and there was a part of me that wanted to say, oh, come on, get over it. I just got up from the table early. It's not a big deal. And there's a part of me that believes that. But I saw that it really affected him. And so I was very sympathetic and said, okay, I'll learn from that. I'll not do that again, And so I can be pretty insensitive at times, as y'all know. So anyway, but he took a risk. And so my point is, I didn't really sin per se. It was just I hurt him. And I think that's what happens in the church more often than not, is that we do something that hurts somebody. It's not so much a sinful thing. It's just an insensitive thing. And I just know that there are people, maybe in this congregation, that bear a grudge because someone looked at them funny or didn't greet them like they were. And we should talk to each other about that and get over that. What does Jesus say in the Sermon on the Mount? If you're going to make an offering before God and you have something against your brother, what should you do? Put your offering down and go make restitution or reconciliation. So what we're talking about here is confronting evil, confronting problems rather than just cooperating it. And the other thing is Esther, she wasn't just trying to help herself, was she? She was trying to help all of her people. And so we need to intercede and not be just individualistic, but look out for the congregation, look out for our people, our family, physical family, our spiritual family. And Esther, she did that. And so she looked to reveal the problem, and it turned out, as we'll see, to her reward. Okay. So the other thing we're learning here, just to make the point, does God defeat his enemies in the end? Yeah, he does. He does. Eventually, he will. And so we're learning how that happens. Okay. And so, and of course, God defeats his enemies in our lives through Jesus. You know, what does Paul tells us? That, Jesus is to the right hand of God until the last enemy, which is death, is defeated. And then he'll deliver up the kingdom to the Father. The point is, all of God's enemy, even the fact that all these pains and aches that we have, that'll be defeated too, right? We were talking, even our anxieties about, I've had members of my family who have died and died, and I wonder where are they going to end up, Even those anxieties, in the end, God will defeat that. Anxiety is an enemy, fear is an enemy, and so he in the end he'll overcome those. Okay, so let's push on because we weren't here or talking about this last Sunday. We're a little bit behind, so we have about 10 minutes. Let's push into chapter 8 because we're going to try to finish up Esther over the next week or two here. So you with me? So this is a happy, in certain ways, happy chapter in which Esther saves her people. And so let's look at what's going on in the story about how Esther is rewarded and Mordecai takes on responsibility. What is Esther's rewards here, and what is Mordecai's responsibility? So it says on chapter 8, verse 1, "On that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her." And what is he? You remember what he is to her? What's the relationship? Huh?
And also
Cousin. Yeah, he raised her, kind of her foster father. Yeah. So they're relatives. And up to this point, the king didn't know. And the king took off his signet ring, the mark of power, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. So basically, what does this tell us? Everything that Haman had, what happens? It goes to Esther and Mordecai. And I'll just say, one thing that I would observe is the older you get, some of you older heads than I can observe this, the things that we are so fearful in life, whether it's persons, or a fear of losing your job, or people's opinion of us, the longer you live, the more you realize those things are not so great and powerful. People whom, I've known people in my life whom I looked at with great almost fear because of the power they had, either in an organization or in the world or in my life. And the older I get, I see them get old and frail, or they lose their position, and I think, why was I so afraid of that person? Why was I so fearful, right? And I would just say that's true in life. The things that we're fear of, except for God, we shouldn't be afraid of them. We should have confidence in the faith. And Haman, everybody was scared of him. Everybody was scared of him. Should they have been scared of him? Look what God did. Complete reversal. And so think about the person who you think of as saying, I don't want to do anything to them, or I don't want to say anything to them for fear of what they're going to do. They're not that powerful. Lean in on that and address that issue. You see that? Because that's the lesson here of Haman's downfall. Notice the repeated request that Esther makes here in chapter 8, verses 3 through 6. What does she keep asking for? She keeps making the point. She perseveres and she pleads. Let's read verse 3. Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman, the Agagite, and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. When the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, Esther rose and stood before the king. And she said, "If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleased in his eyes, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, which he wrote to destroy the Jews, who are in all the provinces of the king. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming to my people, or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?" Okay, wait a second. Didn't she already talk about this? Didn't she already bring this up and say, remember back in chapter 7, verse 4, she talks about this man who's going to destroy and annihilate all of her people. Hadn't she already made a request that not happen? What does she have to do? She has to repeat it. She has to repeat it. She has to keep saying. Have you ever found that sometimes you say something, you don't get a response, nothing happens. You say it again, you don't get a response, nothing happens. You say it, but somehow you keep saying it, and something happens. Yeah.
Because that lets them know it's important.
It's important. It's important. And guess what? As humans, we're smart, but we also can be pretty dumb. And by dumb, I mean we don't hear. There's a saying in business leadership that I found to be true. When you're communicating something to an organization, a college or a corporation, to a family, you have to say it 7 times before it really settles in. So Bonnie, you're needing to tell your mom, you need to stay up there north. You need to stay up there in the north. You need to stay, and you've said it 5 times, but guess what? You still got. So have hope. Let's keep. You may have to cry a little bit, like Esther does. But you got to keep saying it. And there is a wise principle in that. Repetition sometimes. And you feel stupid doing it, but you just realize that's what it takes sometimes. Yeah, John?
I think Jesus has that power.
Oh, my goodness. The woman who continues to go and beseech the man after, for relief. That's right. And that's true in our prayers, too. How many times have we prayed to God for something? That was Jesus' point. Repetition. And what that requires of us, what virtue does repeating something over and over again require of us? Patience, endurance, long-suffering, and, y'all, I'm saying this quickly, but y'all know that is a lot of life, is having to say the same things over and over again. And not just to even get our way, but to have the full effect of what we're saying. I knew I have young people who graduate from college. They go and get married. And there's a young man he's been married 2.5 years, and I'm giving him a little bit of guidance on his marriage. And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, we just, I guess we're hitting the rocks after a couple of years of marriage." And I said, "Well, how do you talk to each other?" And he was telling me. I said, "What have you told her that you love her recently?" And she said, "Well," he says, "I told that to her when we got married." And I said, "Well." Okay, so you don't have to be a great counselor to read this one, right? So why? He's got a point. He did tell her when they were married, "I love you." Why does he have to say it again? What's that? She's a woman. Oh, I'm going to stand over here until the lightning strikes. Even us men. Do you want your wife to tell you that she loves you? Or
Yes,
yeah,
definitely.
absolutely. Why? Because you're a man. No. You need to say that.
Need that reassurance. It's wanting. It's a desire. I don't know what it is. It's something that you need it.
Yeah.
You need it.
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly right.
You just get in the rut and you forget
Yes.
to say it. And sometimes your actions are not saying it
Right.
as much as you think it is.
Yeah. Absolutely. So repetition is key to life, and I find myself things that I once remembered, like I was the other day for the lesson. There was a passage that we were looking at, and it was Romans 13:1. I'd memorized that thing many years ago, but I had to relearn it for the lesson, because you just have to continue to repeat these things, because life is a matter of kind of maintaining what we have. So Esther has to, even though God has given her what she needed in Haman, she has to repeat something in order for it to be effective. And so what is there in your life right now that you need to make a repeated request, a repeated statement of, in order for things to go well? You got to persevere. You got to be passionate. You got to continue to plead. And so look what Ahasuerus, what's the response? We'll wrap up here in a couple minutes. We'll not get all the way through chapter 8. But notice the king's response here. He's content with what she says, but he still lacks compassion at a certain level. So it says in verse 7, Then the king Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring. For an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. Okay? What's the great irony about this statement? Huh? It's the law, but what other edict had he made with his ring and
Haman, he gave Haman basically the same leeway to
exactly.
do it in my seal and it cannot be revoked.
Right. And so he was wrong. He was wrong that an edict can be revoked because he already done it. He's doing it in this very moment.
Well, he's not really revoking it.
Yeah.
He's just giving the Jews the power and foresight, saying, hey, this is what's going to happen.
Right.
Be ready for it, and you can fight for it.
Yeah.
Where before, they had no clue what was coming.
Yes. And he's saying in verse 8, you write what you want regarding the Jews. Okay? And so notice what they say in verse 9, what ends up happening. This is the regulation that Mordecai is going to give in it. Notice the two things. Notice the hope and notice the horses. Okay, that's strange to say. Notice the hope and notice the horses. Verse 9, the king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, and an edict was written according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews, to the satraps, to the governors, to the officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia. 127 provinces, to each province in its own script, to each people in its own language, and also to the Jews in their script and their language. And so what does he write in verse 10? And he wrote in the name of the king and sealed it with the king's signet ring. And he sent the letters by mounted couriers, riding on swift horses that were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud, saying that the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy any people or province that might attack them, children and women included, and to plunder their goods on one day throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. A copy of what was written was issued as a decree in every province, being publicly displayed to all people. And the Jews were to be ready on that day to take vengeance on their enemy. So the couriers, mounted on their swift horses that were used in the king's service, rode out hurriedly, urged by the king's command, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. Okay, so, you see the hope now, and the horses are sending out this message. You can fight back. You don't allow that. And so everything's reversed, and the king's horses are given the message. It's his command. And so God is using the very forces that undermine the Jews, that were going to kill the Jews, to try to save them, right? And so think about how we in our life can use the very things which God uses to destroy us in order to accomplish God's will. Okay? An example. So one thing that I like to do is when we have young people over, or young kids, what I'll say is, hey, show me your music list. Every kid on the phone has got their Spotify or their Apple Music or something, and they pull it out, and oftentimes there's some dirty songs on there, and they're so embarrassed. They're so embarrassed. But what I do is I take that and I say, hey, you know what, I like that you love music, and I build a relationship with them, and then we bond over the music. And so the very thing which is separating from the God, it becomes an avenue for me to be able to connect with them. So we can do that. All right, let's read these final 7 verses and we'll conclude before the kids break down the door. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a great golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple, and the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and every city, wherever the king's command and his edict reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews, for fear of the Jews had fallen on them. Isn't that amazing? People are now converting to be Jews because they were so over it. You see this complete reversal. My question is, what is there this week that we can learn from this passage in which things that are going wrong, if you make the right choice, you can completely reverse them. Completely reverse them. And so let's work on that this week and let God work in our life. All right? So we'll pick up in verse 9 there. Let's say a short prayer and we'll conclude. Can I pray for us? Father, thank you for Esther, and thank you for the story here of Mordecai. May we have her courage and her cunning in addressing the challenges in our life. God, help us to be able to be bold in teaching your word, and help us to be repetitive, to be persevering in saying what we need to say to others and to ourselves. God, give us the joy that your people experience here. Give us reversal of situations in our life. And God, your will, your providence be done. Our prayer in Jesus' name, amen. All right. There you go. Good move. Good move. Keep saying that.